Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Mitch, tell me what you're doing.
Our business is creating workforce housing. So it takes multiple forms. We'll either buy existing homes, tear them down, and build apartments in their space, or we'll buy land and very economically create very modern modular homes on what was previously raw land. So our goal is to deliver workforce housing as economically as possible to the consumer so that the rents are more affordable. And that's the thing we need in this country, more affordable housing.
That's a pretty interesting strategy. So Mitch is finding a beat up, rundown house, and instead of trying to fix it up, he's just tearing it down and replacing it with a brand new apartment building. On the podcast today, we're going to see what's involved in doing this. We'll take a look at the numbers and see if this might be something that makes sense for you. Joining us on the show today from Delray Beach, Florida, is Mitch Roschelle. We'll take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Mitch. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs, and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056.
Rental Income Podcast.
Mitch, this sounds like a huge opportunity. Now, you live in Florida and you're building in California. Why are you doing this across the country?
Well, Dan, there's a law in the state of California, and when I talk to folks about it and ask them to guess what state it is, they'll never guess that it's California. But there's a law in California that allows you to take an existing single-family home and, as of right, replace it with up to 8 units of multifamily or 8 units of apartments without a single change in zoning. So we're talking about going from a single family residential to a multifamily without having to go to town hall and rezone the site. And what that does is it creates a tremendous amount. Think about it. Let's say 4 people could live in a home, in a single family home, comfortably. Well, put 8 units on that site, multiplied by 4, you get a lot more housing. And that's the thing that California needs the most of, is more housing.
So somebody could really do this anywhere, but they'd have to go through the zoning change. So it's just easier in California.
100%. And what's interesting about the legislation in California is that the NIMBY, the not in my backyard crowd, who would say, don't do that on our street. We don't want apartments on our, quiet residential street. Every time they've gone to court or gone to town hall or go to a public meeting and yell and scream about it, they've been shot down, figuratively, of course, not literally. And that's because the government in California is trying to, on a grassroots basis, solve the housing crisis that they have. Homelessness is pretty rampant in California. Housing affordability is a big challenge for residents in California. And the legislature and the governor's office thought that this was a unique way to get the private sector to help solve the problem.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's figure out how you're doing this. So let's start at the very beginning. So are you looking for lots that you're going to build on, like vacant lots, or are you looking for houses that you're going to tear down and build on?
No, it's the latter, Dan. So we will buy an existing single-family home. And if you can kind of close your eyes and think of a streetscape in the city of Los Angeles, a ranch home built in the maybe 50s, certainly 60s at the latest 70s, not very big, 1,400 square feet, 1,700 square feet, something like that. Not the most attractive looking home by today's standards, sitting on maybe a 10,000 square foot lot. The lots in California tend to be not very wide, but fairly deep, which is good for us. And we will tear down that home, after the closing, as soon as we can get a permit to tear it down, we tear it down, and we'll pour 2 foundations for the 2 buildings that we'll put on. And we'll either put 4 units in one building and 4 units in another building, or in some cases we'll put 3 in one and 2 in the other, depending on the depth and characteristics of the lot. But we'll put, generally 5, but as many as 8 units on that site of apartments, 4-story buildings.
So is it just easier going through the process if there's a house already there than if you found?
No, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Doesn't matter?
No, it doesn't matter if it's an existing single-family home or piece of, there's not a lot of raw land in the city of Los Angeles. I'm not going to lie to you. So we're buying existing single-family homes. And by the way, I'm not giving away a trade secret here. Anybody's welcome to try this. This law is not, a secret. But there are 30,000 eligible lots in city of Los Angeles that, so people say, hey, Mitch, you're on a podcast. You're telling everybody about your story. Don't you think people are going to steal your idea? I'm like, knock yourself out. There's 30,000 lots.
Yeah, it's a lot of business. Plenty of business for everybody. Now, yes. I got to imagine that it makes it easier being in a neighborhood with the utilities right there. Is that a huge cost savings to not have to bring in the utilities?
Correct. And every one of these neighborhoods already has city water, sewer, electrical, in some cases, broadband, fiber optic, or it's already on the street. It's either on poles or it's underground. It's all there. We're not blazing new trails. We are not pioneers. We are doing this in existing residential neighborhoods. And in fact, a question you didn't ask, that's how good of a guest I am. I answer questions.
I love it.
But the question you didn't ask is, how does the people next door across the street feel about a 4-story building going up? Well, guess what? I'm willing to bet that they weren't loving that eyesore ranch home that's been potentially neglected for a couple of decades. And we build really modern, really pretty new homes, and we actually transform neighborhoods as opposed to, ruin them by putting in apartment buildings.
Yeah. Now, what about the parking though? Because I imagine, you have a single family with 2 or 3 cars. Now you've got all these apartments and, maybe 10, 15 cars there. Is there enough parking for everybody?
Yeah. So we will put surface parking on the site for all of the apartments. But more importantly, I would venture to say that within a block and a half of every home that we've built, there's mass transportation.
Okay.
Now it's likely buses because we're talking about Los Angeles. So, and Los Angeles is a very car dependent environment. But the thing we have found more and more with some of our younger tenants, because we have 2 different kinds of tenants. We have multi-generational tenants where we will have literally 3 generations living in the same apartment. But some of these are 3-4 bedroom apartments. So it's not like, it's tight. Or we'll have 4 young professionals in a 2-bedroom or 4-bedroom or something like that. They don't all have cars. Back in the day, when I drove around Los Angeles with my Thomas guide underneath my seat, I'm dating myself and giving a little inside baseball LA talk, but everybody had a car. Now, Uber, Lyft are ubiquitous, and bird scooters and stuff like that, and people don't have as many cars. So we have yet to have a challenge where we couldn't rent an apartment because there wasn't enough parking. I would say if there are 4 young professionals living in an apartment, they probably have 1.5 cars for the 4 of them.
Okay. All right. So that's not a problem. Now, what about working with the city to get the permits? Like, is that take a long time to get everything done right?
I've never encountered a city or a town or a municipality in America where the permitting process was perfect. But it's certainly something that is the only thing that slows us down, if anything ever does slow us down. But we have tried to do a couple of things to get the inspectors and the people issuing permits comfortable in advance with what we're doing. So when we do apply for permits, it's not like they're reinventing the wheel, right? The bigger holdup would be if we were changing land use and we had to go before zoning boards and stuff like that, which we don't have to do. So we're going for regular permits. We're going for a demolition permit. We're pouring a foundation. We're going vertical. We have electrical. So we'll have a situation where we're waiting on the electrical inspector to inspect the wiring in the building before we can hook up to the public utility. But we have an expediter in-house. We do most of our construction in-house. So we've sort of disintermediated the slowdown of waiting on subcontractors. The only thing that's out of our control is a city. And we do everything we can to speed up that process as best possible. But if I told you we didn't have to wait for the city, I'd be lying to you.
Sure. Now, what about construction timeframe? Because I imagine building a house is complicated and there's a lot of moving parts. Does it take you like a year or two to build something?
So what we do is we prefabricate the exoskeleton of the homes that we're building, the apartments that we're building, in a factory. And we deliver the exoskeleton and the parts that we need to assemble the home on site. So all of the rough plumbing is put in. All of the wiring is pre-done. Everything's ready to go. So we assemble homes on site. We don't build homes on site. If you go to the typical single-family home builder in America, whether they're an entrepreneur that does it one at a time or you're a big national home builder, on every home site, there's a dumpster, and the dumpster is filled with wood. There is so much waste when things are being cut at the job site. We don't cut at the job site. We do it all in a factory, and we know what we need. We know how many 2x4s we need. We know how many 4x8s we need. We know how much plywood. We know how much everything we need. So it's all pre-assembled. We load it all onto a flatbed. We cart it out to the site. We have a couple of containers with the kitchens and the bathrooms and the toilet bowls and everything all done. Kitchen cabinets are all built. And we just go horizontal with foundation. We go vertical with homes, and we assemble on site. So what would take a typical builder maybe 2 years with cinder blocks and plywood and 2x4s and 4x8s and all that stuff. And 4x4s, you pick your denomination. We can assemble the home and get a C of O in a fraction of the time. And I'll tell you a quick story. There was a home that is two structures that we built on a single family lot. The guy next door did the exact same thing. He used cinder blocks and other building materials. We had built it, rented it, sold it. The tenants had turned over probably because we no longer owned it before that guy next door to us had a certificate of occupancy.
Incredible. So you're talking months versus years.
Oh, months. I would say. So one of our proof of concept property that we built from land acquisition. So I'll just give you numbers too. Land acquisition. We bought the land for about $1 million, existing single family home. We tore it down. We poured a foundation. We built a two-story. We built two 3-story structures. One had 2 units in it. One had 3 units in it. We built all of that for $1.5 million worth of construction costs, including soft costs, including demolition, including foundation, including subcontractor stuff, roofs, solar panels, charging stations, all that stuff. We sold the property 13 months after we bought it for $3.5 million for $1 million profit.
Incredible. All right, so you're all in at $2.5 million, sold it for $3.5 million.
Correct.
Wow.
And that was our proof of concept, canary in a coal mine, call it what you want, to just make sure that we were able to execute on the business plan that we set out to execute.
Now, so is that typical that it costs about $1.5 million to build a new building?
Yeah, it depends on what we're doing. It depends on whether or not we're doing 4 units or 8 units. We can do up to 8. Depends on how big the site is. It varies. We're also we have an inventory of designs So based upon what size the lot is, we know exactly what we're going to build. So when we have a lot under contract, we will start the process of getting the plans pulled together out of our inventory of plans. So we're ready as soon as we close to go to the city and begin to get permits to do stuff. So it's going to vary. I can't tell you that it's going to be $1.5 million, in construction costs. But if it's more than $1.5 million, it's because we're building more than 4 units or 5 units. We can be building twice that, and the value is going to be much higher as a result.
How much does each unit rent for?
It really depends, but we'll pull in like one of these buildings, one of these properties that has 4 or 5 apartments in it. We'll pull in 20, 22, 25, something like that. 100, for a smaller unit. We'll get maybe closer to 445 for a larger unit, but it's going to depend on size. And we're tinkering with what the market really wants. The market wants studios. Does the market want 1 bedroom, 1.5 baths? Like, what do they want? And we're trying to optimize our buildings so we can, deliver to the marketplace what they want when they want it. Right?
So is it $2,500 for a 1 bedroom? Is that about right?
Yeah, I would say that's fair, but we're going bigger. So we're more in the, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, and those are, in the $4,000, $5,000 range.
That's incredible. Now, what about with resale? With the, and you mentioned about making $1 million selling that one property, but like with it being the property manufactured, not on site, does that affect the resale price at all?
No.
Okay.
No, not one bit. In fact, the market for selling these cash flowing assets is really strong. That there's a lot of investors because it's a great price point. Think about buying an income producing asset at a reasonable cap rate for $3.5 million, right? Mm-hmm. What's your competition? You're going to buy a 1960s garden apartment complex or something like that, or you're going to buy a 250 unit apartment complex for, $100 million. Like, this is a way for investors who want to buy multifamily to get in at a reasonable price point. But we do build and sell, but our longer term strategy is to build and hold and build a portfolio of them and basically in the future monetize it through refinances as interest rates come down and monetize it through portfolio sales in the future.
So the rents are pretty high in California. So that basically makes it easier for your numbers to work. But if you were in a lower cost area, would the numbers still work? Like if you could buy the land a lot cheaper, but it was still costing you $1.5 million for construction, would it still work?
The answer to that question is yes. The land would be less. You wouldn't be buying a single family home for $1 million. Mm-hmm. We have another business in Florida. What I was just talking about was Los Angeles. But we have another portfolio company in Florida where we're not buying existing homes and tearing them down. We're buying land, and we're building single family homes, either 1-story or 2-story single family homes to rent. We can build a home for about $250,000 to $275,000 all in, X land, and that building, that home, if you throw a reasonable cap rate at the cash flow from the property, those are worth about $4.5 million. And if we were to sell them just based upon comps in the marketplace, based upon what the homes are trading for per square foot, they're about the same kind of price.
Okay.
So we adopted the macro strategy of creating affordable, with a lowercase a, workforce housing. And we're deploying 2 different strategies on 2 different coasts based upon what works in those marketplaces. Land is way more plentiful in Florida than it is in California.
The numbers that Mitch is working with are bigger than we typically talk about on the podcast. But if you break the numbers down a little bit, they're not as crazy as they seem at first glance. So Mitch is all in at about $2.5 million to build one of these buildings. Now, if you break that down to the cost per unit, so $2.5 million divided by 8 is roughly $300,000. And if he's renting each unit for, say, about $4,000, sometimes he's getting more, but if we just say $4,000 a month on a $300,000 unit, that's a little bit better than a 1% return. And when you think about it, the 1% rule doesn't exist in Los Angeles. So to be getting a 1% return in an area where cash flow doesn't exist is really pretty incredible. Plus, he's also creating $1 million in equity every time he does one of these projects. And Los Angeles is appreciating at a pretty good rate. So these buildings should appreciate over time. Rent should continue to go up. So I think this is really a home run business model that he has. If anybody wants to learn more about Mitch, I've got his information on the website. Mitch is also going to be speaking at a real estate conference called IMN. If you want to get more details about that, I've also got the information for the IMN conference on the website. You can track it all down at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 463. I'd like to thank Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group for sponsoring today's episode. If you're looking to buy a rental property, whether you're just getting started or you want to add to your portfolio, reach out to Chaley. She's a nationwide lender. She has a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something that'll work for you in your situation. You can find out more and set up a time to talk to Chaley at ridgelendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. I'll be back with a new episode on Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.